Okay, we're going to be covering our last two major empires, Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. Just a reminder, this is still taking place during the Renaissance era, and so all of these things are falling in line with the events that happened in Italy. Um, Holy Roman Empire, I'll get there later, but they're not an example of new monarchs, but we'll see kind of the transition of the development of what's happening in Germany at that time. So let's begin with Spain, and just to cut. So let's begin with Spain. And just as a reminder, during the Renaissance, there was no Kingdom of Spain. Essentially, the territory of where Spain is today during the Renaissance was very much fragmented into smaller kingdoms, as you can see in the map in the lower right-hand corner. The main two are Aragon and Castile. Aragon is on the Mediterranean coastal side, and they were focused on more of acquiring more lands amongst the Mediterranean in Sicily and Naples, and Italian territories, and they really had a merchant and commercial economy and trading. Okay, where Castile was the larger of the two. It was the largest and wealthiest kingdom in Spain at that time, and their focus was really to expel and get rid of all the Muslims and Jews. And we're going to see that that's going to be kind of like their mission through the marriage of Isabella and Ferdinand. Okay, one thing to know is that in Castile, it's more plains and flatlands, so they're going to do a lot more agriculture. So they have different types of needs and what they're kind of good at in terms of economically. Okay, so they get married, right? And so this is kind of a personal union. It's kind of in secret, and no one really approved of it. But in each of their own kingdoms, right, they are recognized as leaders. But in cross kingdoms, right, those that were in Castile did not really recognize Ferdinand, and it's hard to really honor a woman as the monarch. But essentially, like over time, they would be helping and supporting one another very well. The hard part about unifying a country is that they really had no common ground between the two kingdoms, right? So you have no political, no judicial, no administrative institutions where they could kind of overlap and they could rule accordingly. And so that's something that they had to develop over time. Many of the nobles were still very influential in these kingdoms of Aragon and Castile, and they wanted to obviously keep their independence, keep their power, and not to be influenced by the monarchy, right? So this is just to demonstrate that it started off as more of a personal union, and they never established the Kingdom of Spain until later. Okay, when they came to the throne, right? Both of their individual kingdoms were going through civil wars and struggles and different focuses essentially. But when they came together, the heirs of both Aragon and Castile, they would help each other in pulling the resources together, and they're able to unite their kingdoms over time. It's not through their lifespan, but the heirs after them. So one thing to know is that there is no Spanish national feeling saying like, oh, I'm from the Kingdom of Spain, right? The language spoken between the north and the south is very different. In the end, the Castilian Spanish is going to be the one that's going to be standardized across Spain. Okay, so they are going to take the first steps to bring Spanish unity. So we're going to look at what was their main method. Okay, so the only real common ground, the tie, is through the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church in Spain was a little bit different from the rest of Europe in the sense they weren't as corrupt, they weren't as abusive and lazy and immoral. And through Isabella, she coined this phrase, right? One king, one law, one faith. And she wanted to establish a Christian nation in saying that you have a monarchy, right? This is totally what the new monarchs are for, right? Having the monarch call all the shots, right? Have all the power, and it's under one religion, okay? So eventually, the Inquisition will come, and this is basically the different courts, judicial courts that are trying to find out where there are legit Christians, the legit Catholics, and trying to find out who are the Jews and the Muslims. And they're going to be using the act of torture to find out who is loyal to the Catholic Church, essentially. Torture will be very painful, and eventually you'll confess, oh, I'm a Jew, I'm not really a Catholic, right? And then sometimes they'll use public humiliation. There's different ways to torture people to get the truth out. Okay, so why are they even looking to inquire to see who is really the legit Catholics? Because this is one thing that Isabella really wanted, right? She was on a mission, and we're going to see that the Reconquista is the war, right? The reconquering that is implemented by Ferdinand and Isabella, but the Pope's going to support this, obviously, because the Catholic Church is behind this as well. And so this is going to happen from 1482 to 1492. It's going to take about a decade, and they're looking to take back the Kingdom of Granada, which is in the most southern part, and that's where all of the Muslims, remaining Muslims, really was highly populated. Okay, and so finally in 1492, the same year with Columbus sailing the Ocean Blue, Granada was going to be annexed by Castile. So you're going to have 500,000 what we call Moors or Muslims. They are going to be reduced down to 100,000. Okay, but that's not the end of it. Okay, in a sense, to have a Spanish identity was based upon how devout you were. And so the new monarchy in Spain is going to be very religious. They're going to say that we're going to have a religious conformity. Before this, right? Spain had a very diverse culture, right? They had Jews, Catholics, and Muslims all working together. The Jewish and Muslims were very much thriving and very much participating in society, and they were accepted for a long time. Jews were kicked out much earlier in England and in France, and so they hung around the longest in Spain, and so there was a good amount of tolerance. But by 1492, right, two approaches started to come out, right? So the more Spanish you were, it was based upon how Catholic you were. Okay, that's kind of how they identified you. So over time, there's going to be a segregation where Jews and Muslims are going to be seen as outsiders, and to the point where one of the two approaches is where you would just expel them. So expulsion is requiring them to just leave, right? You give them 3 months, you got to go, don't take anything with you, okay? You got to keep like all the valuables here, and you're just going to go and just leave us, right? And so this is something that is very alerting to religious intolerance, okay? And if not forcing them to leave, right, you're going to force them to convert. So this is the way of the Inquisition is going to be implemented, right? Is that you're checking, okay, if you're not leaving and you're really going to be converted, right? Are you truly a Catholic, right? And so those that choose to convert are called the conversos. But there is, a huge deal if you pretend to be Catholic, because then you're secretly being like anti-Spanish, and you're being deceitful, right? You're being deceiving. Then you have two other groups. You have the Moriscos, who are the Christians who have converted from a Muslim background or the Moorish background, and then you have the Marranos, who are Christians from the Jewish background. Many times it's been said that Jews would change their last name to Spanish cities to sound, more Spanish, more Catholic in that sense. How do you kind of like sniff them out in terms of if they're not legit? Sometimes these conversos have certain traditions, right? For example, neither of them eat pork, and so if we see that, oh, you're avoiding pork, like, are you a truly convert? Because if you really were, like, you should be able to eat pork. It's fine, right? And so there's a lot of suspicion that will come. The Inquisition is there to torture them, and seeing that, like I don't think you're a legit Catholic, and so you need to show more outwardly that you are. If you're practicing the Sabbath, right? That's very Jewish, and you're resting on a Saturday. Hey, at Catholics, we don't believe in that. Okay. It's also been said that outside a lot of butcher shops, they would hang, pork out there to show that I'm truly Spanish, I'm truly Catholic, right? I'm afraid, like I have no fear of like showing off that like pork is for sale. Okay, where that be avoided because that's part of the tradition of the Jewish and Muslim culture. Okay, so the significance essentially of the Reconquista is that many of these religions are going to face intolerance, and they're going to have a lot of victims where they're being targeted, and even people that were probably just falsely accused, right? But in the end, the prestige of the monarchy is going to be heightened because we're showing the authority and the control and the power is centralized by them, right? So that Isabel and Ferdinand are the ones who are calling the shots. They did not completely unify Spain through the Reconquista. However, they were able to conquer those lands, and they're trying to really bring Aragon and Castilians together, bring through marriages, also establishing a common coinage, but still it wasn't that smooth of a transition. One thing of a motivating factor I want to add into is the fact is in 1453, it's the fall of Constantinople, right? And so you can see that that's the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and the Turkish Muslims, and they're invading Eastern Europe, and they're coming around, and they're getting close to Italy too. And so this is the time where Isabella is recognizing this, and as she's growing up, she's seeing that these Muslims, possibly are going to be at war soon with the Catholics, and so she's going to expel them as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Okay, so the heirs of Isabella and Ferdinand are the ones that are going to be unifying Spain, specifically Charles V, who is their grandson, and we'll get to that. Okay, so in wrapping up for Spain, there are certain foreign policies that they would institute. Spain basically is going to have a crusade, right? So we talked about the crusade was to conquer the Holy Land, right, for their religion. So in the same sense, right, the crusade is for Spain to be purified of all non-Catholics, and over time they're going to be going to other places too. So the Americas and the New World, right, with Christopher Columbus, they are going to see if they can bring the American Indians to Catholicism, right, and they're going to convert them there. Also part of the Mediterranean in North Africa, they're going to try to convert more of the Moors and invade North Africa in that sense. Also for Europe, with Spain's strong religious identity, they're going to be contributing as a growing role in the position of politics and religion and the conflicts that are about to come in the next chapter with the Reformation. Okay, and so Spain is going to be in Europe the leading defender of Roman Catholicism and its traditions. And so because they're so like headstrong on being staunchly Catholic, right, they're not going to fall to Protestantism along like France will not either. Okay, but other places like Germany, Holy Roman Empire will. Okay, so essentially one last thing is that through certain marriage alliances, they're going to kind of check the power of the French by building alliances with England and with the Germans and the Austrians, but not the French because that's their neighbor and they don't like them. Okay, so here's an example. Here you have England, if I can get this going. Okay, so here you have England, okay, and Spain working together, and we talked about Henry VII last lecture, and he has a son with Elizabeth, right, and their first son is Arthur. So Arthur is going to be marrying Isabella and Ferdinand's daughter, so they have 3 kids, okay, and then their daughter their daughter Catherine is going to be marrying Arthur. So England and Spain create this alliance through there. Arthur will actually die early, and then Catherine will be married to Henry VIII, which we'll get to, and there's plenty of stories there, and they will have their child Mary. So that's one alliance that's anti-French. Okay, second one, get to it. I'll come back to in a second. Okay, all right. Cool. All right, so the Holy Roman Empire is a fragmented empire. They pretty much have 300 semi-autonomous German states, and there really is no political unity at all. Right? Each state has its own foreign policy, and oftentimes there's civil wars between each small state. 300 small states. That's we have 50 in the U.S. and 300 is like way more broken down. Okay, with a lot less land as well. The Habsburg dynasties. Shout out to Habsburg family. They are starting in Austria, but they're going to be constantly re-elected as emperors, and that's why they call it a dynasty for centuries to come. For like 400 years. One thing to know is that the Holy Roman Empire was not what we call a new monarchy, because the emperor himself did not have central power. There was no central government. I mean, like, he was the emperor of that whole empire, but he didn't really have any really great powers and authority to raise taxes or have his own army that we all talked about are characteristics of what a new monarch has, right? And so the Habsburg dynasty, as powerful as they were, starting from Austria, but later they're going to combine with Spain, they aren't going to have a real hold on the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, and so one emperor is named Maximilian I. He's going to be gaining territory because of his marriage with Mary of Burgundy, which I'll show you in the next slide. And this is what is going to, we talk about the Habsburg versus Valois wars, right? France versus Austria. Maximilian I is also the grandfather of Charles V. Okay, so if you look at the map, okay, you have the bottom one, which talks about Germany and all its fragmented 300 states, and then you can kind of see of how big the Holy Roman Empire takes up, right? But essentially, they're pretty much independent in all of what they do. Okay, all right. So this is the second major arranged marriage of anti-French alliances. So you have Maximilian the First. He's from Austria. Okay, I'll put a little A here. He's from Austria. And then he marries Mary of Burgundy, right? So that's east of France, right there. And then you have, obviously, Spain. We just talked about that. And then Catherine, she marries Arthur. Call him Art. Okay. Now, Joanna is the other daughter. That's not Catherine. Okay. Joanna and Philip. Philip is the son of Maximilian. Okay. They have a son named Charles. Okay, and so Charles becomes Charles I in 1516, and he's going to be Charles I in Spain. However, in this is 1520 here, but I think it's 1519. He's actually going to be called Charles V because he's the emperor. Okay, so he has different titles based upon which kingdom he's ruling, right? If he's over the whole Roman Empire, he's Charles V, and that's what he's mainly known for because that's such a big empire, but he's also Charles I, just in the King of Spain, okay? All right, so because he's such a privileged young man, okay, what are his inheritances, okay? So from granddaddy Maximilian, he's going to get Austria. From grandmother Mary, he's going to be getting the Low Countries, the Netherlands. Okay, and from grandmother Isabella, he'll be getting Castile and also the New World territories in America that Spain is in control of. And then from grandfather Ferdinand, he'll be getting Aragon and a lot of the different territories, part of the Italian possessions that Ferdinand was able to acquire, Naples and Sicily. Okay. And so, yeah, in 1519, he was elected as Holy Roman Emperor, and this is really important because he's kind of like the figure, the head, even though he doesn't have much power, the face of Germany at that time, okay? And so everyone's going to know him, really famous guy. And so what the significance is that the Spanish throne is now passed from, to the Austrians, right? So now you have the unity between the Habsburgs, right? The Habsburgs are now in control of the Austrian side, right, and also the Spanish side under Charles V. Okay, so the dominance of the Habsburgs, as you can see here on the map, right? You have the peachish color, right, and also the yellowish color, and also the greenish color that is supporting Charles V, right? His influence over Europe right, at this point, and his enemies are in the blue. Okay, so take note of that. So one of his enemies is going to be the Ottoman Turks. Okay, so Ottoman Turks, they're pushing towards Hungary at that point, and the Hungarians that are part of the Austrian Empire, right? They're saying, you know what, we need support, right? And they choose Charles V's brother, Ferdinand I, to be king of Bohemia, okay, in Hungary. And at that point, the Habsburgs are now in control of Central Europe, right? We call that Germany, parts of Italy, Netherlands, Spain, parts of the Mediterranean as well, and of course their acquisitions in America, right? So in the New World, they also have that. And so what we're seeing is that there's this threat of a possible universal monarchy, right? Possibly that in Europe, there's just one family that's dominating the entire continent. And so Europeans are now having this fear and saying, like, how are we going to preserve our independence from the Habsburgs, right? And that's something that they're going to try to check and work against. Okay, Spain is going to hit a golden age. Charles V recognizes that Castile and its acquisitions of the New World has made it very rich, right? All of the gold and silver taken from the New World as well. And what makes Spain to be such a powerful empire upon the European continent is not so much what Charles V did, but just bringing Spain into the European affairs through the Austrian Habsburg alliance of family. Okay, they're going to become a world power. Spain's going to become very proud of themselves, and they're not going to be stuck to their just, oh, my kingdom Castile. But this is where they enter, right? Kind of the diplomatic realm of the entire continent. Okay, so we talked about the Habsburgs and Valois Wars. It's going to continue on into the time of Charles V, and so you have the kind of the rock paper scissors we talked about: Charles V, Francis I, and Henry VIII. Henry VIII is kind of the middleman, right? And so Charles V and Francis I are kind of like playing tug of war, like, be my best friend, support me, right? You like me better. Essentially, it's Charles and Francis trying to duke it out because they have fought over lands in Burgundy and also in Italy that they're trying to take back from each other. Henry VIII is eventually going to side with Charles V because he wants to reconquer some of the French lands that were lost in the 100 Years' War previously. Francis and Henry are going to have some meetings, and Francis is going to persuade him the best he can. But Francis will fail, even though he tried to entertain him, Henry VIII, for 25 days, but he will lose. Okay. All right. Essentially, the military feats come with a few major events, right? So you have the Battle of Pavia, right, in 1525. Charles was 25 at this time, and he was, like top shot, right? His top gun, and at that time, he defeated Francis, and he took him prisoner. And Henry's like, yeah, good. We did a good job together. And he wanted to basically dismember France itself and break up France and take over the French kingdom and split lands up like that. But Charles didn't want to be so forceful because he had other enemies as well, right? He had the Ottoman Turks coming in the east. Also, the Protestant Reformation just broke out, and he's trying to handle that. So there's many things where he doesn't want to go out on a full-out war. Okay. In the end, we had the Treaty of Madrid that kind of like ends the Battle of Pavia, right? And Charles got what he wanted, right? So Charles got the Burgundy lands that was once taken from his inheritance, okay? And essentially, Francis, when they signed the Treaty of Madrid, right, he was able to go back to France, but he just rid himself of the treaty. So the treaty is no longer valid, and so he broke his promise, right? And so now war is going to resume. Henry VIII, right, feels like he didn't really get much out of it, and so now he's going to switch sides, and he's going to join Francis now, right? So it's kind of like backstabbing a little bit. So Francis is going to get the support of Rome, Francis is going to get support of England, and also the Ottoman Empire to take down Charles V, okay? And so over time, Charles is going to go from what was, the dominant one to be the one that's going to be taken over, or at least at war with, okay? Charles will have his German mercenaries invade Italy to the point where Rome will be sacked, as we talked about, and this is going to be the end, the symbolic end of the Renaissance in Italy. Europe is going to be kind of in shambles because Rome's like a major capital. right? And so this kind of ends as far as militarily for Charles, because he's going to deal with what we call the Protestant Reformation, which is going to cause even more trouble for him to bring unity amongst his empire.